On today's episode of I'll be interviewing Randy Fricke, Colorado native and longtime friend of the Independent Voters Movement. Randy is the current co-chair of the National Election Reform Committee out of Western Colorado. He just recently finished a book entitled America's New Revolution, where he discusses mainstream issues from crony capitalism to gun violence. You can find Mr. Fricke's book on Amazon.com. I posted the link in the description section below should you want to purchase a copy. Mr. Fricke's focus on today's interview is America's undemocratic election system and how fixing the electoral process could solve America's many pressing issues. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Randy Fricke. So Randy, can you tell me a little bit about your involvement with the Independent Voters Movement?
Well, I've been involved in Colorado politics for many years. I ran for Congress in 2004 as a progressive Green Democrat. That was in 2004, and I worked with some governor campaigns, congressional campaigns. Then about 2010, I didn't like the way things were going with the party process. And so a good friend of mine from the Colorado legislature and I decided to go independent in 2010. And I've been hanging out with them ever since. I got involved more directly with the independent voting group out of New York in about 2016, 2017. And so this is where my leadership kind of took off when I started working with them. And then I was invited to be a member of the National Election Reform Committee, which is a branch of independent voting. So co-chair of that group.
What do your duties as the co-chair of the National Election Reform Committee entail?
We do voter surveys, we do different types of voting assessments. But the last year, this committee created the new Declaration of Independence, We the People. We decided it was time to make a clean break with the two major parties and declare our independence. We definitely went out on a limb and started that movement to get independent voters, or just Americans in general. Hey, it's time to get away from the two parties. You got to take a break and join this progressive independent voter movement.
Randy, I actually recently purchased a copy of your book, America's New Revolution. Could you tell us a little bit about what's in it?
Yeah, I'm very proud of this book. Basically, it's a culmination of what I examined about our American government in the last 5 or 6 years and up to the present. And it's a review and analysis of American politics. And then I get involved in my main focus with the book is about election reform and how the American people, namely the independent voter movement, can move America into a more democratic election process. So that's my main focus of the book.
In your book, you state America's current election system is undemocratic. Could you please explain to us why you believe this is?
Well, absolutely. It's pretty obvious that the Democratic Republican parties control the whole ballot access. They determine basically who runs for president, who runs for Congress in this country. And independent voters, which makes up a very large voting population in this country, and many of those voters have no choice, no voice in this process.
Why is that, Randy?
There are many states that do not allow independent voters to vote in primary elections. That's what I'm after in this book, is to illustrate how we can change that process, have Americans get more control of the voting process and the election process. Because considering the political climate we have now, this divide that has been created in America today, it's all because of the two major parties, the Democrats and Republicans. They've created a terrible situation. The voter restrictions are getting worse instead of better. And so that's why we as independents really need to step up and look at these options I have proposed and get those options out there in front of the American people.
Well, what is the indie voter movement doing to change this issue?
Number one, the basic approach is from independent voting, as far as the movement and the leaders in the movement. They've been working on primary election initiatives such as the open, nonpartisan, open primary elections. So they've been advocating that for a number of years. One example of this work is in Alaska last year, where they passed open elections, open primaries. Florida's example last year had a great effort at going to open nonpartisan primaries.
In earlier conversations we've had, Randy, you spoke about various election reform initiatives that have failed in other states. Can you explain more to us about these initiatives and why, in your eyes, they failed?
But the two parties got together with their super PACs and just defeated Amendment 3. I talked to Steve Huff, who was the organizer of this amendment in Florida. So I think that they're going to give it another shot. What I'm getting at is that these two examples, and there's some other efforts that were made last year as well in South Dakota, Arkansas, and I'm probably forgetting a couple other states that tried to get open primaries, but they were all defeated. What I'm getting at, that process is so slow.
Are they going to try again?
Once they're defeated once or twice, it's hard to come back and bring those up again.
Could you please help the audience understand why independents need their own primary?
There's millions of independent voters that have not been allowed to vote in the primaries, in the party primaries. So we got to correct that situation. At first, I proposed that independent voters or create or establish their own independent voter presidential primary.
For those of us who don't understand, would you mind explaining caucus?
Caucuses in this country are the most democratic election process in existence. This is where the grassroots Americans can participate without the two political parties looking over their shoulder. And if it's done right, and I'm going to experiment with this in Colorado next year to have independent voter caucuses. So that's kind of the grassroots start. The parties cannot control that. This is one area they cannot control. So that's why I feel it's a valuable tool for independents to create a more democratic process here. So I think if we're going to have primary elections in this country, this is something that's got to be strongly considered. And so I think starting off with the caucuses, then once we gather enough states that start this, start enough caucuses working together, then we can go up to the next level, which would be independent voter primaries, which are more sophisticated, more, a broader outreach to independent voters. And then eventually, hopefully, we get to the National Independent Voter Presidential Primary concept. So it's kind of a stepping process where we have to step up into this kind of, this is kind of like a pioneering process where I feel very passionate about this, and there seems to be no other alternatives, but this is probably the most democratic alternative out there right now. So I think it's very good.
This sounds like a lofty goal with 2022 approaching fast. Please, Randy, what are your chances for success?
2018, I co-founded the Western Colorado Independent Voters. This is a group, former Republicans, former Democrats, independent voters. We got together in 2018 and said, we got to do something here and to make our elections more democratic. So we formed this group here in Western Colorado. We've gained national recognition with our ideas and approaches here. This is kind of the base group from which I'm going to launch support from this group and do a lot of outreach between now and next year. That's kind of our starting.
Will independent voting, open primaries, and the other national organizations support you in this effort?
Well, we've had some very good questions. So we've had some initial discussions several months ago when my book came out. and promoting these ideas about independent voter primaries. So that caught the attention of the national group of open primaries. And so basically, I think it's, if I can do the work, if we can do this work in Colorado and, create this independent voter caucus concept and really work hard at it, I think once we get there next year, hopefully independent voting and open primaries will support this 100%. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Randy, what type of support are you looking to gain from independent voting and open primaries?
They have capabilities, with their outreach processes, open primaries. There's a lot of national meetings, either virtual or in person. Same with independent voting out of New York. They have a lot of forums they create online. So hopefully I can tap into those kinds of things from those groups where they have these national forums. And I think that would be a starting place where we can educate independent voters about this new alternative. So it's a work in progress.
What do you think the sentiment of the American people is regarding this issue?
I think American people are so disgusted with the political process in this country. I think they're very hungry for this.
How do you feel the two major parties will react once this development gains traction?
Yeah, they probably won't like it very much because they won't be in total control.
Okay.
And so the idea is that, is to shake things up. This is one way to do it. They've had control of this election process for so long. Basically, the two parties have put the American people in a party voter prison. We're in their prison. We can't escape because they're controlling everything. So this is one approach that helps us break out of the prison that the two parties have put around all of us. And we need this breakout. We need this democratic escape. And this is one avenue. This is one approach we can begin work towards a more democratic election process, which we don't have right now.
Well, Randy, thanks for your time and joining us here on the channel. For everyone else watching this, I'd like you to know I'll be doing interviews such as this in the future to gain a better perspective from local indie voters on the ground. Free your mind, and remember, free the voters.